Hi, TBN family, and welcome to TBN Meets. Now, unemployment has been a word that has become all too familiar to us, whether it has affected us immediately or we know someone who is out of work. From August to November 2021, the unemployment rate in the UK was at its highest in England. And it raises the question, is there anything that can be done to tackle this? Well, I am joined today by Matt Parfitt, the CEO of Grace Enterprises, whose goal is to help reduce long-term unemployment and poverty in Nottingham. Matt, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Matt, Grace Enterprises is doing incredible work in Nottingham. But before we get on to talk about that, can you share with us a little bit about yourself, where you're from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Nottingham and went to Manchester to go to university, but came back and trained to be a primary school teacher and got married. So teaching in a rough part of town, and then felt God really speak to me about becoming an employer. So
amazing. And you started Grace Enterprises, which really is about transforming lives through supportive employment in your sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
So share with us where this idea was birthed from and when you really got the idea to start this.
I think tracing it all the way back to potentially going to Kenya in 2006 and seeing a church there doing amazing work through businesses and employing people. And so I think the seed was sown there. In 2007, I felt God speak really clearly. So I gave up my teaching career to start being an employer. That was through gardening, employing long-term unemployed, so people who've been homeless, ex-offenders, ex-addicts, etc. So I did that, and I did that for 10 years. So that was what the pre-runner to Grace Enterprises. I'd always, because if you think about seeing it in Kenya at a church, I'd always wanted to do it as church. So for me, it was a huge joy when Grace Enterprises was born. For what it's worth, I go to Grace Church in Nottingham, hence the name.
So when you launched in 2017, it was with the church, as you mentioned, with Grace Church. So talk about that process of launching Grace Enterprises.
Yeah, it's not the typical thing that every church does, not just the next ministry to do. But I think been at the church for a long time by then, knew the leaders well, and I think they'd seen what had happened the previous 10 years, sort of employing people. So probably would say, got God's grace or God's favour for that, and then I would have put a proposal to them about, I think if we do it as a church, it'd be a completely different level than Matt's quite a nice guy, he'll do your garden well, to being we as a church are getting involved in something, we can be Jesus' hands and feet in the workplace, and so it was sort of born from there.
And that's quite a big job to undertake. So in what ways did you seek to achieve all of this?
Yeah, for me, the actual business, whether it was gardening then the first business starting a cleaning, it's just the vehicle. It's about getting time with people, being side by side. Discipleship is the word that we would use really in Christian circles, isn't it? And so getting alongside, speaking into people's lives, just spending time together. I think particularly for blokes, being side by side is so much easier than the face-to-face conversation typically. So I had some great times in the van, great times gardening, doing it together, but then going as a church, the fact that we could employ a way more diverse range of people, a bigger number of people in different settings, just meant that was just a vehicle that could employ more people to see more lives changed.
And what I find so unique about Grace Enterprises is that it's different jobs for different peoples, and you really are tackling in Nottingham. It might be a slow process, but you are starting to really tackle the long-term unemployment that it faces. So share with us how through your businesses you are changing and transforming lives.
Yeah, so the first business we started was Radiant Cleaners, which is a social enterprise cleaning company, and we employ deliberately people who have been long-term unemployed, so with major barriers to work, including the people I've mentioned, but also victims of domestic abuse, survivors of modern slavery, people who've been struggling with mental health, and employ them in our business. And we're not talking employability, we pay everyone, so jobs, we pay everyone the real living wage in an industry where, again, that's not the common thing to do. Genuinely believing, my aim summed up is to be a godly employer. So therefore, what does that look like in terms of hiring people, loving them, if necessary, disciplining them, and even if necessary, firing them, but doing it in a godly way? So actually, what we do is we give people the job, which in many ways is the easy bit. But then my wife, Sam, heads up the sort of employee support. So we're interested in the whole person. So the holistic side of it. So she would be, if someone was turning up late for work, rather than fire them, we'd be asking them what was going on in their life. And maybe it turns out that their neighbour's really noisy and they're not getting a decent night's sleep, and try and do something to help. Or maybe their teenage daughter's got pregnant and they're stressed for that reason. So just sort of caring about the person, looking behind the sort of presenting issue, and actually believing, as God does, that everyone's valuable and that it's worth bothering rather than just we'll sack someone, hire someone else. So that's what we've done with Radiant Cleaners. Last year was a huge success in that we've been going since November 17. So the last year, through the pandemic, we doubled the team from 16 in January 21 to 32 by the time the year ended, which is amazing. We'd had the number of sort of big customers had gone up. We ended up winning the Social Enterprise of the Year awards.
Amazing.
And these are sort of worldly businesses recognizing what we're doing, take the faith element away.
Yeah.
So it's great to be able to stand up as a business, but obviously the real reason for why we do it is the kind of thing we're talking about today, and see real lives changed.
And can you share with us any stories of people that have been working for Radiant Cleaners whose lives have been changed through the work of it?
Yeah, and I would encourage people to go to the website because there are loads of examples. And this is the thing that I love the most. We have got people, so there's a guy in our team who's 53, was addicted to one thing or another for 43 years. But he's come to know Jesus, but then has also started volunteering for the church and then started working for us. And that is a joy. He's still in very fragile accommodation now, but we'd love to be part of a solution to see him working more, earning more, being able to move out and stand. And that feels like the next part of his journey. So we're able to support him, mentor him, etc. That's great. Also for non-Christians, we've got people who are coming. The people came to our carol service before Christmas who have never been anywhere near a church, but they're wondering what kind of church gives a job to someone like me who doesn't even go to their church. Why would you do that? So an understanding of grace and Jesus' love. I also get asked in questions. Someone asked me recently. It was good. It was an astute question. We were having an interview, and he was saying, "I don't believe in this stuff, and do I have to believe in it to get this job?" To which the answer was no. If you're asking me why do I do what I do, I'll happily tell you. But even if we knew right now you would never come to faith, we'll give you the job. Obviously, we are praying that he does.
Amazing. And as well as Radiant Cleaners, you also have Jubilee events. So share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we started an events business in January 22 and felt called for a whole range of reasons to start in that area. It's a mixture of timing, talent, treasure, and so them all coming together. We've been waiting a long time because I've always believed we need to have different businesses to create different jobs for different people. But I mean, the events sector, the events business, probably easiest to imagine corporate events, so putting up big marquees for people who need some more space. But also, if you imagine a wedding reception on a Saturday, the jobs we're most interested in would be putting up the marquee on the Thursday, say, taking down the marquee on the Monday. And to give you an example of why, it would be, well, that's a bit different. There's room to take it down on Tuesday if we couldn't take it down on Monday for some reason, as opposed to office cleaning, where the boardroom's got to be cleaned at a certain time. There's not much wiggle room there, and we need to come through as a business and deliver. So it actually means we can, in some ways, lower the bar a bit, and in terms of who we could get into a 4-person team putting up a marquee is different to who might be in a 1 or 2-person team cleaning.
Right.
So to me, that's the exciting bit. It's, there are some people who we cannot employ in Radiant Cleaners that we think we will be able to employ in Jubilee events, and that's the reason for diversifying.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you said about different jobs for different people. And I really think there's something so profound in that, because you're reaching your whole community. You're not just, helping one area, but you're really finding a business model that's going to help change the whole community with everyone involved. So share with us a little bit how, you've seen changes in Nottingham as a whole, because, the work that you're doing is incredible and it really is changing lives. So what do you hope to see in Nottingham?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't claim we've changed the whole of Nottingham just yet. But when God comes and does that, then I'll be delighted if we've managed to be a part of it. We have seen families where a dad had never works for us, and then his son, who's never even thought about working, comes, knocks on our door, asks for a job. So whether that's sort of raising people's hopes and aspirations, we've seen people talking about purpose, about dignity, and those are in 1s and 2s, but then they start to be groups of people. After our last team social, without being prompted by me in any way, a group of people went off who were totally disparate, had come together. The only thing they've got in common is Radiant Cleaners' job, and then they've gone off together and now make their own social group. And to see the sort of relationships restored or or built even. Some people haven't had those relationships. It is really fun to be a part of. And yeah, moving from one business to another, to me, there's no jump because we're treating people well, and that's the aim. So treating people ethically. So every business will have the same ethos, for example, paying people the real living wage. And it's things like that that ends up with us getting to speak into the business community and into society more. So I never really expected when we started this to end up having sort of influence, but we ended up in a conversation about modern slavery and construction. And we're there as the example, employing someone, speaking to 7 companies, each like £1 billion companies, and then little old us at the end of the table. So the idea of speaking truth to power is great. I love it because we can actually say whether we've got God or not in the conversation at that point. It's sort of standing up for the least, the last, and the lonely, standing up for the marginalised and giving them a voice. So that's what we've been doing so far.
Wow, that's so good. And I think, there might be people watching who think, wow, this is incredible. But what about the process of getting to this place? Because I'm sure along the way there were challenges and there were struggles. But the amazing thing is we can see the fruit of it, we can see the product at the end. But there could be people watching that have business ideas or, have things they want to do, but maybe are nervous to take that first step or a fear of failure. What would you say to that?
Yeah, the catch-all would be they're very welcome to get in touch. I'm very happy to email people or have a Zoom call or something and talk through some of it in more detail. Yeah, it is not easy at all. I don't think I would ever try and persuade anyone to do it. And at the same time, if anyone was saying, I feel like God has spoken and told me to do something, I'd be the last person to try and dissuade them from doing it. I think you need a bit of that when times get tough, because what have you got left when the spreadsheet says it's not going particularly well, you've had a bad day, a bad week, whatever it be, and then if you think, oh, maybe I just bit off more than I could chew, this was a very difficult thing to do. Whereas if you're starting from, God has called me to do this, it doesn't look like it's going to work right now, but he's called me and he will provide, he'll be faithful. There's a different sort of feel to that, I think. So I would be very reluctant to do it without that. Like, oh, I've had an idea down the pub, I might try something.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone feels like the call of God on their life to do something, then it is going to involve sacrifice. It is going to involve being persistent. And genuinely, you're going to have to believe it, but more than anyone else. There'll be times when I'm the person carrying it and everyone else, for whatever reason, is like, it's a step too far. Whereas if this is where God's taken us, then so be it. And that's what we'll do. But yeah, definitely, I could do another interview about tough times.
Well, can you take us back to when you first launched Grace Enterprises? And I want to understand from you kind of what were some of those challenges in those early days? Kind of what were the things that you faced that maybe really you really had to rely on God and lean on God for understanding, just to guide you through?
To me, it's 10 years in the making by now, because I've believed it and been doing the gardening business. So there's an element of, I think we can pull this off. But when it's I and we're in trouble, if it's like we think that God has called us as a church. So it was a real source of excitement to me that the elders had looked. The first time around, it was just, we got on with it. My wife and I decided it was a God thing, we'll do it. Second time around, it's we really genuinely feel like this is a God thing, but over to you, the elders and the leaders of the church, to weigh this and see if it's where you feel like God is calling us as a church to go. And then having that level of support is different, but not a particularly wealthy church, so certainly wasn't given a blank checkbook, here you go, but more like, here's a few £1,000, we'll pay your salary for 6 months. So, I mean, that's amazing. So some people might think that's not very long at all, it's not very much money, and in some ways it's not. But to me, it's like, great, 6 months to prove that something could work, that God's called us to do, this will be fun. So that's how it started. But yeah, you could argue, therefore, you're 6 months from running out of money on day one. And that would have been the truth. So genuinely believing God will bring customers, God will provide in whatever way he chooses, that we will see lives changed. Otherwise, what's the point in doing it? I could go back to teaching. It'd be more straightforward. But actually, yeah, having a church on board has always been one of the key things. And so with the mentoring, when I talked about the holistic support, there's only so far we can go as employers. But actually having people in the church who get alongside someone and sort of mentor them, have a coffee with them, ask them how things are going, try and help them to achieve their goals, which might be to do with cleaning, but probably aren't. and actually us being a helpful step along the way, or when things are challenging, putting an arm around their shoulder, asking why, and potentially being able to support them before it even needs us as employers to get involved. So that's where us and the church working together is completely different to any other cleaning company in Nottingham, where it's purely transactional, a job, probably not being treated as well, and it's just a job. Whereas for us, it'd be the other way around. They'd be like, cleaning, that's just the vehicle. We're more interested in you as a person.
Wow, I think that's so powerful though, because it really shows the hands and feet of Jesus in a community. That as you mentioned, the church is there to support, but also you're able to give people that job and that purpose that they need. But I want to focus on one point that you said that I found interesting. That this was 10 years in the making. And there might be people watching who have been sitting on ideas for years, and they might feel like this is going nowhere. The waiting is going nowhere. I can't think about what it's going to look like, or this is too much time. But that's actually really powerful that, and also it's quite beautiful to see how the ideas that were planted in your heart maybe years ago maybe didn't come to fruition for 10 years with the idea of Grace Enterprises, but all in God's timing, he just lined up everything for you. So could you speak into that waiting period that maybe happens when you have an idea that's not yet ready to release into the world?
Yeah, it's tough. Having seen it in Kenya with the church running businesses, I genuinely came back thinking, we have seen this, it's amazing, we must do it now. And then church would have said, it's not the right time, or we don't feel that's what we're called to do. And honestly, it would have felt like God has called us to do this. And so that's hard to weigh that up, because the two things don't fit together very easily. I genuinely felt like God has called me to something specific, to the point where on a Saturday in May 2007, and then I'd hand him a notice in on Monday morning.
Wow.
So there was no sort of sticking out fleeces, weighing it up, thinking for a long period of time, because as far as I'm concerned, God has spoken, and no one will ever convince me otherwise. But that doesn't mean it's all easy, because then they'd be like, well, then when it's going badly, you'd be like, well, did I hear you right? Or start doubting yourself. So I think that, a faith and an understanding of a God whose time scale is totally different to ours is going to be essential. Trying to be humble and think, well, particularly if it was in our case with church. So for me, this is primary focus. Church has got a whole loads of things to focus on. So why would they? This isn't their only thing. So therefore, it needs to, having humility, which hopefully has increased a bit over the years than when I first came with the idea, but having a determination and just, I suppose, a conviction. Because if you were easily dissuaded, then it probably best is that you are dissuaded from doing it. So in some ways, it's all right to have a bit of a time of waiting, because you probably wouldn't have managed to make it work anyway, because you would have struggled at the first hurdle.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have managed to persist through for year after year after year, and you're still convinced that it's the thing to do, then I guess there is an element of sort of not quite proving yourself in the waiting, but an element of that. And it's not just that, I had a nice idea at the weekend, and we're putting a sacrifice in there first. So giving up a career. There are plenty of times when I wondered, what on earth am I doing?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? But then there'd be so many other times where you'd see people who are having their lives transformed. And then you remember, it also has to all be couched in like the times when I get fed up with people and thinking, why they're so ungrateful. Don't they realise what I've done? And think, you just have to catch yourself at that moment and go, it's like, think about God and us and what he's done for us on the cross. And I think I'm particularly ungrateful for that at times. And so just realising that God's grace for me is so much bigger than more than any grace I ever show to any employee, and just trying to start from there, really.
Yeah, that is so good. And with Grace Enterprises, what does the future hold? What do you hope to see in the next 1 year to 5 years with the company?
Nobody in Nottingham asks me that question anymore, because it'd be too word on the answer. My wife certainly would never ask that question. In a year, I would expect we'd have started the next business. There's a real momentum at the moment, so it may or may not be linked to the events business, but I think we'd do that. There's a national charity talking to us at the moment, realising how important employment is. You said at the beginning, those stats. So no one's arguing about unemployment being a massive issue. And so therefore, if we can provide jobs, if we can partner with them, things could get big quite quick. There are other people who are looking to support us in different ways. So I think at the moment it's just trying to discern which of the doors that God is opening and which of the doors that aren't for now. And that's a tricky thing. But if you're asking me where will be the vision is to transform Nottingham and then the UK and then beyond. So therefore, somewhere along that spectrum in the next 5 years, and to just redefine the way that church and business, Christians and business can operate. Because why? There's nothing special about cleaning. There's nothing special about an events business. I think if we as Christian employers make the effort to get people into our teams who the world would say are unemployable, the world would put on the scrap heap. But if we make the effort and employ them, treat them well, guess what? They actually work really hard because they've given this opportunity. And they've got hope, they've got purpose, they've got dignity. Some of them will come to know Jesus, some of them won't. But we as a church would be seen as an organisation, a body that's actually making a difference in society, practically, like it used to do a couple of 100 years ago, rather than just be a token thing that you may or may not add on to your Sunday morning. And that's the kind of faith, the kind of belief I want to have. Like, I don't want something that's an add-on, do that instead of washing the car. It'd be like, give my whole life to it, because I believe it.
Yeah, wow, that is so powerful. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing about Grace Enterprises. Before we finish, can you share with us how people can get involved with Grace Enterprises?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point really, probably go to graceenterprises.co.uk. From there, you'd be able to find Radiant Cleaners, you'd be able to find Jubilee events. You could send me an email, you can get in touch that way. And that would give you a flavour of like what the umbrella body Grace Enterprises is trying to do, and would take you to each business from there.
Lovely. And before we go, do you have any last piece of advice for Christian employees or Christian businessmen and women in the UK who are watching right now?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Work is tough, but I think actually we are called to work, and we're called to be responsible whatever God has given us and to be responsible with. However, if you are in a business, then you actually have a lot of power and can influence a lot of people's lives. And I think that we need to do that really well. If you're an employee, then potentially you need to work really faithfully for your boss, who may not be the best, and you're doing it as if for God. But that is far easier said than done. But I think that working in a business, wealth, money being created, that's not a bad thing. It's a question of what is done with the profit. And that's why we want to redefine it to run a business where the profits are all reinvested, and then we just go again to help people. So I'd love to see more companies do that. I appreciate that's not what every company is going to go, but I think as people do become more socially responsible, the Christians and non-Christians, I'd like to see us lead by example. So the rest of society is dragged up rather than us being dragged down by them.
Wow, that is so good. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all about Radiant Cleaners, Jubilee events, and Grace Enterprises. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.